Chapter 12, the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. So chapter 12, 13, and 14 are all the same system. They're all the nervous system. And if you think back to chapter 11, we said that the spinal cord was central nervous system. The spinal nerves are peripheral. And in chapter 13, it's going to kind of be the same. The brain is going to be central nervous system, and then the cranial nerves are going to be peripheral. So we're going to kind of talk about one half, and then we're going to talk about the other. So, outline of the chapter. The CNS versus the PNS. Central nervous system. We know that from chapter 11, the brain and the spinal cord are the only two organs that we see in the central nervous system. It receives sensory information, it evaluates and integrates information that it receives, it stores some information, it initiates reactions. This is the exact thing that we were talking about when we talked about the reflex arc. We said that we had the receptors, we had the control center, and we had the effector, right? Well, the control center does this. If you go back and look at that, this is exactly what we said the control center did. So our central nervous system is our control center. The PNS, the peripheral nervous system, we've got nerves and we've got ganglia outside of the CNS. Nerves are a whole bunch of axons that have been kind of braided together from different neurons. So a nerve isn't one neuron. A nerve is a whole bunch of them put together. The ganglia outside of the CNS. So remember something. I believe I went through this already, but just in case, I'll go through it again. If I'm braiding these things together, and we're talking about braiding things together like this is very, very thin, and braiding these together is not going to be, is not going to cause it to turn into this huge, massive thing. It should still be fairly streamlined like a coaxial cable, but when we add this into the braid, you're going to go from having these thin things put together, into where the cell bodies are, and the cell bodies are very, very big. So your nerve will have these kind of big bulging areas to them where these are located. This is called a ganglia or a ganglion, depending on if it's singular or if it's plural. Plural is ganglia, singular is ganglion. So basically, it's an accumulation of the cell bodies. So it's this accumulation in kind of this expanded portion. What does the PNS do? Well, the PNS is the other part of our reflex arc. So again, we had the receptor, we had the control center, we had the effector, right? It collects information from numerous sources inside and outside the body and relays it through axons of the sensory neurons to the CNS. I collect information with my receptor and I bring it into my central nervous system. The other half of that is the motor half. Once I make a decision and I want something to happen, I have to have another set of neurons that carries the information out to my effector. So while my control center, my CNS is here, right? This is PNS and this is PNS. It's just the two halves of the PNS, the sensory division on the left and the motor division on the right. Incoming information versus outgoing information. So the spinal cord, it's the central nervous system. So we're talking about the central nervous system division. It is the major communication link between the brain and the peripheral nervous system inferior to the head. It participates in integration of information and producing responses through reflex mechanisms. So think about this for a second. If this is my body, my brain is up here, my spinal cord is here, yes? Anything that happens down here has to use this highway to get up to here. So when I say it's the major communication link, That's what I mean. This is the only place that I can get to so that information gets carried up to my brain. I know most people think about integration of information and that higher level thinking and things like that only happening in the brain. But there are some things like reflex actions that are actually completely taken care of in the spinal cord, which you'll see in just a bit. So my spinal cord extends from the foramen magnum at the brain until about L2. It does not go all the way to my sacrum, and you can actually see that here. That spinal cord ends there. We've got basically 4 different segments to this. We've got the cervical segment at our neck, we've got the thoracic at our rib cage, the lumbar, and then we've got kind of this sacral region down here. It gives rise to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So we've got 31 on the right side and 31 on the left side because we have C1, the first nerve that comes out, but we've got one on the right and we've got one on the left. That's why we say they are pairs. If you look at the diameter of this spinal cord, you will notice that, or you won't because it's not letting me move it, it kind of thickens up here and then narrows down and then thickens up down here. These are 2 areas of enlargement that we have, okay? Up here is the cervical enlargement. Down here is the lumbosacral enlargement. And you might say, why the difference in diameter? Well, the nerves that come off to go to your arms are coming off through the cervical enlargement. The nerves that go into your legs that come down into here are coming off of this lumbosacral enlargement. So it is kind of it needs to be thicker because I've got more branches coming off of it. You have the conus medullaris. Medulla means middle. It'll always mean middle. Conus means cone. If you look at the end here, you can see that it kind of ends dead center in the middle as a cone. That's the conus medullaris. Now, do you see all of these branches coming off of it? This is called the cauda equina. Equine means horse. Caudal means tail. This is called the horse's tail. If you were to take a horse's tail and kind of hold all of the hairs together, it looks very kind of dense and concentrated, almost like a ponytail. And when you look at this part of the spinal cord in an actual cadaver, it kind of looks like that. You've got all of these individual nerves, but they're all kind of packed together. So they call it the cauda equina. They call it the horse's tail. The meninges. So one of the things that we do is we protect the brain and the spinal cord by covering them in these connective tissue coverings called the meninges. Okay? They cover the brain and the spinal cord, kind of our 2 most important pieces. We've got 3 layers to them, going from the outermost layer to the one that's basically shrink wrap on top of our organ. We start with the dura mater, okay? Dura mater literally translated means tough mother. It is the most superficial, and the reason that we call it tough is because it is the thickest. It literally is the thickest membrane that we have. It covers both the brain and the spinal cord. Around the spinal cord, it makes what we call the thecal sac, okay? The thecal sac. Imagine taking a pair of pantyhose and gluing, well, I won't even say pantyhose. I'll just say one leg of pantyhose, okay? So just hose. And you put it around the foramen magnum. So you're creating basically a pocket for that spinal cord to fit into. This actually makes that sac that we call the thecal sac. So here's my foramen magnum, and I take this and I basically make something that holds your spinal cord as your spinal cord comes into it. Now, the epidural space, epi means above, dura mater, and then space. If you look here, here's my dura mater, okay? That kind of brown. And here, I've got this space between my dura mater and the bone of my vertebra. We call this the epidural space. Now, the epidural space has a layer of fat between the dura mater and the vertebra. Why? Cushion. I mean, think about it. Do you want your spinal cord whacking into bone every time that you shift around? No. So what do? I put all of this padding here, and now this doesn't shift around. It's kind of stuck in the middle, like I put packing peanuts in the way. When a person gets an epidural, that is actually happening right here in this space, okay? That space right there. So when they tell you you need to be very, very still when you get an epidural, the reason is because they're getting extremely close to your spinal cord. This is probably equivalent to about the size of your real spinal cord. When I have it up in class, it's about 25 times the size of what I see on my computer screen right now. This is probably closest to what your actual spinal cord is. This is not a lot of room to mess up. This is also why they have you fill out tons of forms saying that they're not liable if anything goes wrong. The arachnoid mater. The arachnoid mater is the next layer in. So this layer right here, this is the arachnoid mater, okay? And they call it the arachnoid mater because it looks like cobwebs. It's very thin and it's very wispy, okay? The subdural space is this space between the dura mater here and the arachnoid mater here. That subdural space is that space that you can see right here, okay? So in that subdural space, you have a small amount of serous fluid. Remember, serous fluid is for lubrication. So you've got kind of this lubricant between those two layers. Internally, I've got the pia mater. The pia mater is this layer right here, okay? You can actually see it's right on top of that spinal cord. Pia means affectionate. So pia mater means affectionate mother. And the reason that they call it that is because it is literally hugging that organ. The innermost bound very, very tightly to the surface of the spinal cord. Also here, between my arachnoid mater and my pia mater, I have the subarachnoid space, which is right here. You can actually see between this layer and this layer, okay? This is where you find that cerebral spinal fluid I talked about in chapter 12. This is my substitute blood supply. Blood is very dirty. I don't want it near my brain and spinal cord, so this is my substitute for that. Okay, so if I were to just put a set of hose inside of a tube and then put something inside the hose, there's nothing holding that hose in place. So we actually do have two sets of, well, I shouldn't say ligaments, one set of ligaments and one structure that kind of help to hold our spinal cord so that it doesn't shift up and down and it doesn't shift side to side. So we've got the denticulate ligaments. They hold it from the side so that if somebody pushes me, my spinal cord doesn't like jut to the left or the right. If you look at this picture, you can actually see those here. You can see them kind of anchoring to the sides. The other thing that we have is something called the filum terminale. So if you've ever seen a video with somebody who puts pantyhose on their head and they try to yank the pantyhose off, usually the pantyhose just get tighter and tighter on that person's face. This actually surrounds your spinal cord, this kind of membrane, and then the end here anchors at your sacrum. So this prevents basically movement superiorly and inferiorly of your spinal cord. So the best way that I can think to describe it is, let's say there's a kid rolling around on a skateboard and he's on his belly on the skateboard. So he's laying down on the skateboard and I grab his feet and I pull really, really hard backwards. If his spinal cord wasn't anchored like this, his spinal cord would stay put and eventually just jut up into his brain, which wouldn't be a good idea. So this actually keeps it stuck where it's supposed to be and doesn't let it move up basically toward your brain.